Using Excel for data analytics, training for accountants and auditors. My name is Jim Kaplan. I'm the founder of AuditNet. With us today is my colleague and friend, Rich Lanza, an audit software expert. This webinar represents a collaboration between AuditNet and AuditSoftware.net in delivering training series focusing on audit software. We're really glad you could join us. I'll be moderating today's webinar, and a little bit about myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder of AuditNet with a background as a chief audit executive, Internet for Auditors pioneer, and an auditor who believes and promotes the use of technology for audit. The next slide provides a little bit of information about AuditNet, which is now available both on the web and on tablet devices. Before we proceed to today's material and introducing our presenter, Rich Lanza, I'd like to go through a few important housekeeping points. Please pay attention to these housekeeping items. This webinar and its material are the property of AuditNet and Cash Recovery Partners, and unauthorized usage or recording of the webinar or any of its material is strictly forbidden. We are recording the webinar, and you will be provided access to that recording within 5 to 7 business days after the webinar. We are not responsible for late arrivals or connection problems. Please make sure the pop-ups are allowed on your computer. The webinar is being recorded, as I said, and also the views expressed today do not necessarily represent the views, positions, or opinions of AuditNet or the presenter organizations. The information presented today is strictly for educational purposes and does not constitute accounting or legal advice or create a client relationship. You may ask questions during the webinar. Use the chat box in the lower right hand of your display, type in the question and click send. The presenter or the moderator will respond either by private message or to the entire group. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you will receive an evaluation questionnaire. Please respond to help us improve our future events. Attending this live event does qualify you for CPE. You must be in attendance for a minimum of 100 minutes for the session and answer the required polling questions. Only those who are in attendance and receive all the polling and answer all the polling questions will receive NASBA CPE certificates. Please allow 5 to 7 business days to receive the certificates. Questions on CPE should be directed to Rich, and his email is rich@richlanza.com. His contact information is also on the last slide, which we sent out the handouts this morning. Some technical items: if you're having trouble with the webinar software, check to see if Java is enabled and whether you have any pop-up blockers disabled. If you're still not able to get the webinar to function, log out and log back in again. If you can connect to the webinar in the audio portion but get kicked off at any time, just reconnect using the same steps you used first. Thank you again for joining us, and without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Rich Lanza to introduce himself and get into today's topic. Rich?
Thanks again, Jim. Thanks everyone for coming today. Really exciting crowd, and we do appreciate it. I have a bit on myself here as well. I've been doing this a long time. I use Excel and other products on a daily basis, so I'm always learning more and trying to learn from other experts as well. So hopefully you'll learn a lot of stuff today and also see how to apply it to the audit field itself, as opposed to just being more of a general discussion about technology and Excel usage. So as we get into the learning objectives for today, I want to show you and even have a white paper to give you that you can mimic almost everything in Excel that you can do with much more expensive tools, and that's becoming more and more true as things like Power Pivot and other graphing products that are within Excel now are really quite powerful. We're going to talk about how to get data, which can be a big issue for a lot of people, and I'm even going to give you at the end of this, as part of the files you get, a data request that you can send out, and hopefully will benefit the data that you get back. We'll talk a lot about pivot tables and other types of uses of Excel, even talk about an add-in to Excel that might be useful to you real quickly, and show you how it could really help you in a sampling situation. We'll talk about all the types of graphs that are out there, as well as give you some knowledge about macros. It won't be a full course on macro development, but we'll get you started. And also, we have some macro Excel files that we're going to be giving to you at the end of the broadcast as well. And we'll talk about that towards the end. So from an audit perspective, I just wanted to start out. This is something I wrote about 6 years ago, almost 7, and it was about how audits could be done without using analytics in them. And I just feel, it's something that really has to be done these days. And this was about 7 years ago. I think they have been used a lot more than in the past, but I always found it interesting. The case on malpractice was basically saying if everyone else in your industry is doing it, then someone of reasonable care or reasonable professionalism should be able to do it as well, meaning you. So that's something where you need to think about that, and especially if you are doing audits and not using technology as much. And I think that applies also to the internal audit world, as this was more focused at the external audit world. There's a great guide out there the AICPA puts out called Analytical Procedures, small book, $20, $30. But I think it gives you a nice perspective of all the different types of analytical techniques that can be used in the audit practice. And it is a substantive test. If you could do a good enough analytic, it actually is substantive. And that's really where the technology comes in, that you can start to build these analytics so that you don't have to spend as much time pulling a lot of sample units themselves. So one of the free white papers we're just noting here is I have a white paper on how to use Excel in every situation, and I did it, probably thereabouts a weekend, because I just decided it was kind of time to write something like this. And also it provided, let me just open this up for everyone, provided a great, just noticing here, so provided a great analysis of all the different types of Excel, and in looking at the different types of analyticals, there's obviously the financial statement ratios that you could really do easily in Excel, and then getting into like Benford's Law and other types of techniques. Now, this was written almost 8 years ago, so bear with me. I mean, parts of the Excel discussion may have been improved since the time of this writing, but at the same time, this is a very useful white paper in providing you a good analysis of all the different types of Excel usage. Now, it is a little hard to do some things in Excel, and that's where I think some of the use of add-ins is helpful. And just skipping back to the slide here, that active data for Excel link is basically where I'm coming from that perspective. It's a great add-in. We have a great price on it, and again, something to consider. We will talk about as we go through the presentation a couple of instances. The stratification is one of them, where it is hard to do this in Excel. I'm going to show you a way using VLOOKUP that does a better job than this, and then active data does it even better than that. Okay, so these are the analyticals, and then we talk about all the different types of data management type tasks, like merging data together or joining data together, which is VLOOKUP, which we'll talk about today, cross-tabulating, which is a pivot table. So again, without spending too much time on it, I want to give it to you and have you read it at your leisure. That at the same time, we will be talking about a lot of these components in today's presentation. These are all the things it talks about. So, thinking about the audit process itself, and, bearing in mind we have about 110 minutes today, so I'm really trying to kind of speed through this basic stuff up front and get into the actual Excel analytics. But I do feel it's a good idea to give you the overall process, and the process being know what your audit objectives are before and come up with reports that align to those objectives before you ask for data. A lot of people will ask for data up front, and that will be an issue in the sense that they will get data, but maybe not all the data they need for the audit objectives. So you really want to tie it back. It's almost like your business requirements is to figure out what reports you want, then go get data, talk about validating, obtaining, that kind of thing, and then you run a bunch of reports on it, which I even think you should macro, and that's why I want to show you some of the macro technology. But at the same time, regardless if you macro or not, running these reports on company data is really where it's at, and where we'll spend most of the time today. In obtaining data files, one of the things I'm going to give you is a data request letter. And that data request letter will essentially go through the various fields that you would ask for, the time frame, maybe some notes or questions about each file. This is an accounts payable example, and we will use accounts payable a few times today. And then talking about things like data formats, which I think is key to talk about what format should they provide it, and the data structure to get an idea of that, as well as some other data verification tools, which might just be the hard copy of the last page of the check register, as kind of a tie back, something from a totals point of view, from a record count point of view, and then data delivery. We had some other questions on accounts payable. Maybe you'll find that interesting. It might be something, I'm sure you could take this and do like a sales data audit, because it's, order to cash and payments for things are similar. It's just the reverse process. Okay, so that's the data request letter. And then I wanted to then talk about the validation work that you should do. So I think to even have a set of good questions in an audit program, did we get all the data tables that we wanted? Is the supplier data table of a good quality? This is because it's accounts payable. That's why we're doing these examples. Is there one invoice per record, or is there multiple invoices that we need to combine to form a distribution, etc.? I think there's good questions you should ask about the data and so that you understand it. I think also doing some sort of statistics on the data, and obviously that's something we will be showing you today, and then also just trying to agree things back to those batch totals that you got in the data request itself. So with that said, I wanted to bring up the first polling question. Now that we've kind of gone through what is the process to auditing very quickly, and also from a data point of view, and then how to get the data, let's bring up this first polling question. So just waiting for that to come up. There we go. What comes first in the data extraction process? Is it to request data, set objectives for the audit, set report objectives, or validate data? So those are the four. As you are completing that, I will get lined up for the next part of the presentation. This is a great time. If you have any questions, please bring them in. I do appreciate the point about the not moving slides. I was just off in the heat of the moment explaining and not noticing the audience view. I'm now tracking audience views, so we'll be able to handle that, but thank you again for those questions. We do the polling questions for NASBA compliance, and I can see that 95% of you have voted. I'll just keep it open for another 30 seconds. I try to keep them open for like 90 seconds, and it's really, you don't have to get them right. It's good if you do, but you do need to be there and available, so we do appreciate it. Okay, I will just give it another few seconds. Okay, so I've closed the poll and shared the results with everyone. And as you can see, they're setting objectives for the audit. Number one, absolutely correct. And you really want to do that before you get to any sort of data extraction. So let me go back and hide that now. And we are set. Okay, so what I wanted to now do is talk about pivot tables. So we'll kind of get right into the statistics work, and just give us a second, we'll get that going. So getting started, pivoting data, I'm assuming that everyone is on Excel 2007 or 2010 these days. Now, there is Excel 2003. I do still bump into people that are using that product, and maybe you're still there, and that's fine. But it is about 9 years later. So, I mean, we are getting to a point where hopefully people are converting over. A lot of the concepts today will still work in 2003. It's just a little bit different. So just bear that in mind if you are on Excel 2003. But what's nice about 2007 is you do have this insert pivot table button, and it's on the insert menu. So it's a little bit weird, like why, is it on the, you would normally think it's on the data menu because that's where it used to be in Excel 2003. But with the ribbon of Excel, they've moved everything around, and now it's on the insert menu. But if you insert to a pivot table, it basically does a pretty good job at finding all of the data and essentially then posting a pivot table. And in getting around the pivot, what I really like is, and this is in the new kind of Excel, is that they have this pivot table tools. And you'll see that in this next slide where essentially you have an ability to, at the top menu there, to do a lot of work. And I'm trying to show you actually both the options and the design. The options allows you to handle things like options, such as options in a pivot table, field settings, sorting, changing the data source, adding calculated fields in, I believe there, that might be the design actually. No, that is still in the options section where they have formulas there, pivot charting, etc. So those are all of the things that you have. Even moving from Excel 2007 to 10, there are some subtle differences in the menu bar, and again, you'll actually probably see that even in this slide as relation to what we'll be showing in a little bit. But it's very slight and something where you can very quickly find. And one of the things that I really like actually in looking at all of this is being able to graph the data, which we'll show in just a couple of seconds. But one thing I'll note is that in a couple of things, you can change the field settings by selecting the field settings button, which is over on the left-hand side here. It's the top menu right under that sum of invoice amount. But there's a field settings where you can change things. But what I find there is you can do quite a bit with that, and you'll see that. We're going to be doing that quite a bit today. But you can also right-click any part of the pivot table data and also change the field settings. So that's something that we're going to do a lot, and I wanted to show that. And when you do that, the value field settings, you're able to kind of not only change things like sum or count or maybe the average or the max or the min, very quickly. I mean, you can start to say, what is the largest amount that a vendor posted in the accounts payable data? What is the smallest amount that a vendor posted in the accounts payable data? What's the average for that vendor? And just by selecting the word average, it calculates that. In the show values as you'll see, you'll be able to even make it more of a percentage base, which is really kind of neat. From a field settings formatting the cells, which is that number format button, goes to another page, you can then do all of your formatting of data. Again, we're going to be doing all of this in a few minutes, but I just wanted to kind of show you it first in the slide format. Graphing the data. Again, by selecting pivot chart, one button click, and boom, you are automatically then into a pivot chart. That is dynamic. So as you change the pivot table, you will also add or change that pivot chart, which is very, very useful. And one last thing is grouping data ranges or date ranges. What I find is that the grouping function is useful. I don't use it too much other than for dates, but I find for dates, as you'll see, to group things by quarter or by year or by month by just, again, right-clicking a field and hitting the group button and then grouping by, again, by year, month, or day, or whatever. You're able to get a lot done very, very quickly in your analysis. So now that we're in Excel, I have a payables data file open here, and it's got a few extra things that we're going to work on later today, so just try to ignore some of this yellow stuff over here. Just in ignoring that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight only the data that I want. So it's that A through I 4822, select the insert button, and then the pivot table button on the left there. And it's pretty smart. It goes from actually D1, which is wrong. I want to make that A, so you can edit it here. Oops. want to do from A1 to I4822. And at this point I wanted to also note, which we won't be doing today, you can, and this is where you get into larger data sets, you can use an external data source as well. And you can bring in data from, say, a comma-separated file that is 2 million records big, no problem, and that external data will allow you to do that. Then I'm going to go to a new worksheet down below here, hit the OK button, and we're at our pivot table format. So we're going to start dragging and dropping fields in, and what I usually do is I work more on, let me just try to move this up a little bit so you can see it. I work more in these bottom area down below here, and as opposed to bringing things over here. But let's just play around just kind of quickly here. I'm going to first bring in the invoice date, and I'm going to bring the invoice date into the row label area. So notice now all my rows are my dates, and they're sorted from chronologically. Excel does its best job at trying to figure that out. And then what we can do is bring in the enter column, and I'm going to bring that into the columns label. So notice now I have my columns up here that have the summary by person and by day. Then what I can do is I can bring in the invoice amount field into the value section. Whoops, just drag and drop that into here. And notice how things are a little bit unformatted, not the best, in formatting sense. So let me just kind of change that by going to my value field settings. I just click on that drop-down button here, go to my value field settings, and click on number format. And in the number section, we'll change that to that type of format, a lot nicer to look at. And now I have a much nicer looking chart by day, by person. Okay, just continuing on here, what I'd like to show now is I can right click on this and I can select the group button. So that's just clicking on any date, right clicking, grouping. And right now it's day, month, year, but I can do it, let's say, by month, and year. So we just have month and year. And now we have more of a year and month type graph. So it has 2009 and all of the months, 2010, all of the months, and a little bit of 2011 in there. So pretty cool stuff. I've been able to kind of group things. Let me just now show you, just as we've created this simple kind of pivot table, let me go back up to this menu and show you, based on the menu, what we can do from the menu bar, because there's a lot up here that can apply that, again, you can do what I just did by working more within the pivot table and right-clicking on things and doing that, but you can also just go up to this menu bar up above and do quite a bit as well. So in the menu bar, we have a few different options here. Starting over at the left-hand side, we have the pivot table options. I'm not going to go through all of these because I just don't think it's worth it right now. Things like the totals, you might not want to show the grand total for the columns or the grand total for the rows in here. I'm going to leave them in, but you don't have to. One of the things that I like in my display format, we have the classic pivot table layout, which is the way I normally set things up. But normally, 2010 has this deselected. Okay, so other things that you might want to consider, I don't use these very much, to be honest with you, as I look at these labels and format, might be how you should display numbers. So whether or not you want to display your data, and from a printing point of view, you might want to set print titles or etc. So there's a few different options in there. I'm showing you this in more of this unclassic mode. Didn't really seem to change very much here, but there is kind of a classic mode and an unclassic mode as well. Okay, so other things that we can walk through is in the field settings option. Again, right now I'm in the years column, so obviously I can change the field settings here. In the invoice date, I can select field settings, again, make any changes there. In the amount section, field settings, and that's where we were just a second ago. And personally, I find it easier to work more on this right-hand side when I do my field settings, but again, you can select in the graph or in the pivot table and select that however you like. Another thing that you might want to do, just kind of going over to this grand total column and going to my pivot table tools, you could select the sort option, and you can maybe sort largest to smallest as well, and then that will sort it within that particular time range, so you can actually get this as opposed to being sorted in a monthly format. You could sort it from the biggest month to the smallest month, and maybe that's something that would be useful for you. If you want to go back in any way, and I'm even unsure of how to do this with the ribbon, to be honest, but I just select Control-Z, and Control-Z will kind of bring you back to whatever you'd like. And actually what I really like is, this Control-Z or undo, here it is, up on my top pivot table options here. You can really undo quite a bit. I mean, you can go back and undo my grouping that I did, the option change that I did, and it saves quite a bit of it. So, if you make a lot of mistakes, you can go back and make a lot of changes to edit your data. Okay, again, we'll be going through more of these options, but I just wanted to kind of note you can refresh your data within your data file here, if you make some edits, that can refresh by doing the refresh data here, and a few other things we're going to talk about later, like adding some fields, so let's talk about that a little bit later. From a design point of view, you can actually select styles that might look prettier to you or less pretty to you. I go with the standard one. It's just something I'm used to, but there's lots of different options here and much nicer ones down here, I guess, that you can select. That can really pretty up the chart. I'll stick with this one for right now. Why not? Just to make it look a little prettier. But I find that from a design point of view, I don't spend a lot of time with this, but it's something that you might want to consider. Blank rows, you can remove those. But back in the options, one last thing I wanted to show you, just kind of on the quick tour of pivot tables, is to select the pivot chart option. And the pivot chart option will automatically create a chart based on the data we have. And what I'm going to do is select a stacked column, and you'll see why in a second. And I'm just going to now right-click this object and say Move Chart to a new sheet, and we'll call this, we could call it Sheet 1 Chart. And now we have this new chart. Now, what's interesting is each column of data kind of shows up as a different bar in the particular data. What I like is the way Excel in the pivot table set up the data, where you have the month, the year, etc. Now, if I move this around a bit and I move the years underneath the dates like that, and then so now I have my months here and my years over here, you can go back to your pivot chart, and again, you can almost look at like January, 10 to 11, February 10 to 11. And again, this may be a much better way of looking at things, that you might want to option into. Notice too, though, which is okay, I guess, is that it adds some of these total lines in there. I find them a bit annoying. So I will a lot of times right-click on the total line. So if you don't want a total line, you right-click and just say, get rid of that subtotal, and it will remove it. Now, it doesn't really affect the chart, which we have here. But again, very interesting way of very quickly being able to get different perspectives on your data. And this is from a time perspective, as you can see. Now, one of the things I said was, a great kind of audit finding I found. I'm going to drag out all these dates, right, and just get rid of everything and start over. Let's take that enter date and throw that into the mix, just for fun. And you know what, I guess I can keep the enter in there. I might as well. And let's click the select chart. Now, dynamically, that chart redid itself. And very quickly here, you can see, what are those days that I'm going over $100,000? And there's only a few, or below. And look at this one. I have a negative 374. that was posted by KD on December 8th, 2010. It is completely off the norm of anything else that anybody else is doing. And what's nice about these charts is bear with me, if I scroll in dramatically here to 400%, that might be a little too dramatic. But it's still something where you can see quite a bit now in that data. So, you can get a sense of where people are posting things, and again, you're drilling down pretty heavily here. You have to kind of see, who's who. RL is blue, LB is purple, and KD is green. You see a lot of KDs in there, and RLs, and et cetera. KD is the green one, so that one, you kind of see a lot of that showing up in the data itself. Not only in a large bar point of view, but a small bar point of view as well. Okay, so back now with the polling question. Where do you change the value formats in a pivot table? Grouping section, the value field setting section, pivot chart, or the active field format? So if you could answer that poll, we will be tracking that. And the quicker we get the polls done, quicker we can get going with the next element, so we do appreciate it. And just to note from a questions point of view, there were some questions. One person had trouble hearing my sound, and hopefully that got better. And I'm just trying to take a look here. And then, from a polling question point of view for the CPE, some people are having trouble getting the polling question to take. And I guess, maybe just let us know if you're still having that trouble, if that was just like one-time event. And then there are just a few, but for those that are, one way might be just to submit it through the questions bar for now, and we can just track it that way.
Rich.
Yeah, Jim, sorry.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that if you're joining us from a tablet device, you may not be able to respond to the questions, and you will need to just gather your questions and put the answers into one email and send it to either Rich or myself, and we'll record those in our records so that you will get your CPE. So, just update.
And Jim, just a note from your end, has sound quality been a problem?
No, the sound has been very good from my end.
Okay, good. And some other questions, can this work on a Mac? Yes. I have seen it work on a Mac. I don't want to promise that it will, always work on a Mac. Everything we're talking about, but I think almost everything will. And I do find, someone asked a question about like 500,000 rows. There is a way even to point a pivot table to an external data source, and that even works better sometimes actually, but if it's internal to Excel. 500,000 rows, the only issue I find is that Excel saves itself a lot, so it'll keep saving, it like auto-saves. So if you get caught in the autosave, you could be sitting there watching your screen roll, but it doesn't really have anything to do with you. So that would be the only other thing there. I do find pivot tabling, though, for over 500,000 rows is a great way to go. Okay, so I've had the poll open for way too long, and we've asked answered a lot of questions, so that's good. I'm going to share that poll with everybody. And the value field settings is the correct answer, so we do appreciate that. And with that said, let us continue on with the next segment. And what I wanted to do here is talk about stratifying data in Excel, and also kind of show you some features of VLOOKUP and other features that I think you'll find quite useful. I find stratifying is just such a great tool to be able to quickly understand your data. So with that said, we'll get started with that in just a second here. Generally speaking, stratifying your data in Excel can be a bit difficult. However, we're going to show two techniques that should make it easy for you to stratify your data. The first technique utilizes an if statement. And the if statement can get a little hard to read and understand. However, what's essentially happening here is that the amount field is viewed first looking at the largest amount, the $1,000 in this case, and if so, it's over $1,000. If not, then it goes to the next one and says, is it over $100? And then if not, etc. And we've just come up with 3 strata to keep it very simple, and you want to start from the highest to the lowest and go to the matching item. So let's take a look at this technique in Excel. So taking a look at this formula, we have the equal if formula going to B2, which is the amount field, and then taking a look, is it over 1,000, etc., etc. And you're going to want to copy that program verbatim, and I would suggest not going more than 5 strata. There is a point where memory starts to take hold, so I would say that don't go more than 5. I've used 3 in this case just to keep it relatively simple, yet you might want to go to more. So now that I've built that stratification, what we can then do is go over to the Stratify pivot. And in this pivot, we've already included the strata field within the row label area. And we also have up top the years and months, so that we've actually stratified in this case by that level. And in the below, we then have the various sum fields of the count during that time. So let me just kind of go to the Stratify chart. And in the Stratify chart, you can start to see levels of activity or certain months where in certain pockets of areas there is a very large trend upward or downward for that month in comparison to other months. So heading back to the Stratify pivot table, again in this case we've really just selected that field in this pivot. We're going to get rid of, I'm going to keep the years field because I find that interesting, and I'm just going to take away the kind of the months field in that case. We grouped on that field on months, and here we now have it by year. So let's take a look now at this dynamic chart. And really, again, what's fantastic about pivot tables is the ability to go back and forth between the stratified chart, in this case the pivot table and the chart, and be able to see the wide variations. Now, I didn't realize that in 2010 that it had so much activity in relation to 11 and 9. I mean, when I looked at it monthly, it was sort of hard to see that. But now that I'm looking at it by year, it's very apparent across the board. So now that we understand how to use the Stratify in our pivot table, we're going to go back into our payables data, and I've added a new column using a VLOOKUP function, and that VLOOKUP is taking a look at this table over here. And what I do is I set up 2, and actually, first off, I need to note that Charlie Walker at Top Cats provided this idea, and I do thank him for this because it was a much better way of doing your stratifications, and it does allow you a lot more limit. I mean, you could go a lot more in strata than the 5 or so that you'll want to put into this if statement. So it's a much better way of doing it. It's just a little bit tricky, so you need to watch out. What you want to do is set your first value as the lowest possible value in your data file, and call that 0 and under, because essentially what the system is going to do is take a look at that limit and go anything above that limit until it hits the next number, and then it's going to look at that. So again, I've kept everything in the 0 and under and the minus 5,000. Don't know if I really need the 0 and under here, but I put it in there for safety's sake. And then I put a penny onwards, and then anything over a penny, it's going to consider up to it hits $100, and then it's going to do the same to 1,000, 2,000, and 5,000. Now, I know that I don't have anything over $5,000 in my data file, but if I did, everything would fall into this category here, 5,000 and over, because it would look at that lower limit and then kind of work upwards from there, and that's the last one, so there's nothing else to do. This is a way better way to do it. Let's take a look at the VLOOKUP function. This is kind of my table that I'm using, and I'm going to click on the Insert Function button, so I can take a look at the data. So the lookup value is B2, which is this amount field here. That field does not have the actual dollar signs around it, and that is where we use the table array. Now, the reason we're putting dollar signs around it is to fix that value. And what you can do is enter the dollar signs yourself, or what you can do is select F4. So let me just highlight this. So imagine I've just highlighted that Q through R11. I can hit my F4 button, and it will automatically bring in that information. And then I can close that. Now, I want to carry over, whenever there's a kind of a match in column Q, I want to write what is in column 2, which is R in this case, so you put column 2. Now, the strangeness, or the thing that I normally don't do with VLOOKUP, is use the true statement. Now, the true statement will actually look more for a close, approximate match, as opposed to a perfect match. A false would be a perfect match, and that's really good when you're doing matches on, say, vendor number between files. You want a perfect match. But with true, you can actually get more of a close match, and that's how it's doing this stratification using the VLOOKUP. Again, much better way of doing it, a lot easier to set up, and then edit. Click OK, and I can now, again, I copied this formula down in this sample data set that you'll be able to download as well. And after copying it down, I can go back over to my Stratify chart. Now, in the Stratify pivot, I notice that I have a Strata and a Strata VLOOKUP. I'm going to click on Strata VLOOKUP and deselect the Strata just to kind of get back. And it gives me a little more flavor, I guess, of what's happening, in the data itself. And we're able to kind of see more so than we were able to see with just the 3 categories. If we didn't need to drill down on, say, some of the larger items, I just see this, large year and value. Of course, you can double-click on that, and that will bring up that column. Notice everything here is over $5,000, and I'm looking in column B in this case, and everything is over the 5,000 mark. Now, I feel that the Stratify feature brings into play the ability to then filter out what you may want to look at or not look at. But instead of looking at it in a yearly fashion like we're doing right now, I'd rather bring into play some more information. So let's bring the enterer field in as who's entering what and when. And on average, people should be entering in a very standardized set of amounts over time and should not have a lot of variation. Now, going over to the Stratify chart, you can quickly see who is entering things from a strata perspective. Now, this is one thing where scale comes into play, in my opinion, when you look at these charts, where sometimes it's hard to see some of the variations. So what I like to do, we can even change this chart if you'd like, but I think we could do it with just the area chart. Going back to the Stratify, I can filter out each bucket on its own and just kind of take a look at, where are those pockets of change within just the enterer and the Stratify lookup. And by doing this, taking each one on its own, even though, again, this is only $75,000 on millions, you can start to maybe see where are those pockets coming up more, where people are doing more activity in that range. So as we then take a look at this, I want to now add a little more complexity. And what we're going to do, we have the enterer, so we have who. We have kind of what from a value point of view. And then what I'd like to add to this, in this case, is the years function, which we had calculated previously. Now, if you don't have the years function and you want to select the invoice date field, again, this can make it a little confusing. You can then right-click and then say, group or ungroup, and you can decide, do you want months or years or quarters? Well, just to keep it interesting, we'll select quarters for this one. And then we have the various quarters of the year where activity is posted. And again, looking at accounts payable data, a quarterly analysis can be very useful because a lot of times you find pockets of spend that happen within more, at times where we have more business as a business. So let's go back to that Stratify chart now. Again, a little more interesting to look at in that not only do we have the strata, but we also are looking at certain quarters now and saying to ourselves, yeah, why in the fourth quarter, let's just take a look at the 0 and under on its own because it's easier to do it this way. And just looking at this function here, you can start to very quickly highlight and get a sense for, okay, that's about $377,000 being posted in the fourth quarter as a negative. And that is very strange because the person throughout the quarters 1 and 2 and then 3, they had nothing activity-wise, and I'm looking at the green KD in this case. Again, this could be done across all of the strata, but we just wanted to show you that one just so that you can get an idea. But you see how scale plays a part in it, but also how it is interesting to do more of this 2 or 3 layered type area graphing, because you can start to see pockets of time that look strange for a person in an amount category. So you're taking this Rubik's Cube of data and turning it in 3 directions at the same time, which is very, very useful from an analysis point of view. Many times when creating a pivot table, the data range is something that you need to select, but you can add columns to that data range, and that data range won't know that, the pivot table won't know that, and you won't have your data. What we're going to talk about is an automatic way of setting up what is that named range, and then using, like we are here in the slide, that named range as your data table range for the pivot. So using the named range formula below, and where it says pivot data actually refers to the worksheet in Excel that has your information. It will then use a set of offset and counting functions, best to just copy it as is, as per this, but the only thing that you'll change is that pivot data to be changed to the name of the sheet that you're working with. So going into Excel, one of the things to find your name manager is to go to the formulas and then name manager. Once we're in that name manager, we're going to be entering in that offset name. But let's take a look at the data to understand what we're looking at. Essentially, we have data that starts at A1, continues over to O1, and then down all the way to O4822. So the range in this case is A1 to O4822. Now if we added new columns to this in data, it would go to P and Q and R, the range, and we would like the name manager to then very quickly calculate that range and put that into our pivot for any sort of pivoting. So if I can click on name manager now, again, this is created, but we'll create a new one, and we'll call it test pivot range. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy that offset function, and again, I'm using payables data, which is the same sheet name as payables data below on the left. Yet I need to be careful in that my name manager needs to have either underscores in it or just be completely together like that pivot range. And again, with that in there, hit OK, and that will save it. If I didn't have the underscore, it would actually just say that the name is invalid, and you would need to then enter it. So, and enter it either an underscore or get rid of the space. So we'll hit the close button. Now, I've already done this over in this PVR pivot table just to use as a test here, but what I'm going to do is we want to insert a new pivot table. So I'm going to say insert pivot table, and then into the table range, I'm actually going to select or type test underscore pivot range. And when I hit the OK, I can go to the existing worksheet. I'll just go to a new worksheet because I always do. and hit OK. And now that pivot range is set up. Now just watch as if I enter in this payables data, a full new column. Let's say we want to enter a new enter field, and we'll call this approver. So the approver of the transaction. And going over to my pivot table that we created, I can then, at this point, just hit the refresh button. So refresh, you could do it a number of ways. You could go up to your pivot table tools and find it. It's right here. Or you could right-click and say refresh. Now notice, before, Strata Lookup was our last field, but now approver has been added. So this name range function is what we can use to capture the entire set of pivot data for analysis. Okay, so we've launched the next polling question, which is, what function is used to obtain all parts of a pivot table? And that's for getting the range of data. Is it min, over, more, or offset? And as you're answering that, I just wanted to note some of the questions that have come in. We will not be talking about Power Pivot today. I actually am having trouble loading it to a machine that I'm working with here, but it is something that you can get. I believe it's only for Office 2010. I think you have to be up to that level. Yeah, no, it's a great product. And, some kind of free training, if you will, out there. Mr. Excel has a website, and it's mrexcel.com. And if you go out to that, you can actually get a lot of information about Power Pivot, and he has a variety of videos on it, and it is pretty interesting. I'm still, again, waiting to kind of play around with it. So we'll just leave that poll question out there for just a minute or so more. And we will be talking now about general ledger testing and how you can do a lot of it with pivot tables again. So almost everyone has voted, and I think we've answered all the questions. So I will close that poll, share it. And offset is the correct answer, and that's what we were talking about a minute or two ago. Again, the slide is really good on using that particular function because it isn't that easy to kind of remember that whole function. So, okay, continuing onward here, let me hide that screen. What I wanted to talk about was general ledger testing. And when I think about doing an analytic audit and thinking more, kind of jumping back a little bit on theory to what are the types of reports, in a way this fits like a pivot table where you can query on the data viewpoint of who or what or when or where or why, and you could apply a lot of query techniques, asking questions of the data, such as are there lots of general ledger postings that happen 3 weeks after year end? So these are the ones that are kind of the last of the last entries, would be a specific query. But then data mining would just be looking at by day all of the postings and when they occurred. So, with that said, I do think that these are kind of the perspectives. It gives you an overall perspective to use this who, what, when, where, and why technique. And continuing on into the slides, I then wanted to show you how a few of these techniques fit to the who, what, when, where, why. The first one here is just summarizing on the amount itself and kind of getting an idea of the types of amounts that show up in the data. Then we're going to talk about weekends and holidays and how you might be able to identify some of those. And then summarizing the data by day, month, year. We've kind of done that already, with the grouping in the pivot tables before. So that one we've kind of done. Let me just keep going here. Extracting debits and revenue, kind of filtering those out, and then summarizing the rest. We'll talk about how to do that using the pivot table. and then round dollar entries, taking a look, and these are kind of some of the weird. So when we look at the extracting debits, that's more of where is it posted, or what is it. The next one here is more of like a why question. Why do we have round multiple amounts? It's usually not things usually aren't that round, so why is it? Let's take a look. And then a specific query, but also a good why question, is why do the debits not equal the credits for a particular journal entry? So with that, let me kind of jump into the data itself. So you should be looking at my Excel, and we have a couple of tabs here. I'm going to take a look at the Journal Detail tab. And for some of the questions that came in, all of the files that I'm playing with today, I will be giving to you as a link. It'll take us a few days after the webinar to send it, but again, just noting that that will be coming. And the first thing I wanted to kind of show you is just the data. We have journal entry number, account number, debits, credits, I guess the total for that line, and then is it round or not round? And it's a little difficult of a technique, so again, I have it in the data here for you, but what we're using mostly is this mod function. The mod function will divide a number, which E2 in this case was the total. It'll divide that number, divided by 100. And if the result is 0, there's no any sort of, it'll basically come back as a mod. So let me kind of just show you this, because I think this might be easier just to show you than to talk it through. If I do a mod of that field divided by 100, maybe I'll just put the 0.00 there, it comes out with a differential of 5832, which is basically the remaining value after dividing that by 100. Let's take this one down here, though, this 140, and make the divisor 10 as opposed to 100. Whoops. And notice how I have a 0 remainder because that is divisible by 10. So what I've done is a more complex if statement, a little bit beyond today's session. But at the same time, take a look at it, and it uses the AND feature, and basically whether or not it's not 0 and also something that is round, it'll put the words round or not round here. Okay, so what I've done over here is I've set up a pivot table, so we're going to do that, might as well, and insert pivot table. It's selected the right amount of data, so that's fine. Now the first thing that I'll do is I'm going to drag the journal entry number into the row label section. So now I have that, and then I can drag the debits and the credits over in that section to the right there. Now what I can do as a report filter is I can kind of put in this round and not round. And this is useful because now I can select the round items, and these are all the round $100 divisible type items, and then I could click not round, and then that'll give me the not round ones. So just kind of an interesting way of looking at things. What I'm now going to do, though, is now that I have this by journal entry number, and bear with me one second here, I want to add a field to it, and you go to Fields, Calculated Field, and we're going to call this difference. And the formula in this case is equal, I guess, debits minus credits. And we hit the OK button. And notice how now there's a sum difference over here. But what I can also do is bring the difference into the report filter. Oh, can't be placed there, I guess, because it's a calculated field. Darn. So what we could now do is take a look at that difference field. One of the things we could do, bear with me 1 second here. So we have the sum of the difference. We could also show the max of the difference, but the sum would really be the best in this case. And from a sorting point of view, you can still sort this file, I should hope. And in the pivot table design, I can go to sort, and I could do descending by that difference. So that'll bring some of the top differences to the top, and the negative differences to the bottom. And there aren't that many, and they probably net out to 0 when you get there, but it's good to know which ones are the entries that don't net to 0 when adding them up. Okay, continuing this, so we've already done a few of the tests, and we talked about the days test before. Now, one of the other things that you could do is bring the account number into the report filter. And now that we have this laid out for us, this would be a way, selecting multiple items, of selecting items that are revenue accounts. So let's kind of get rid of everything and then just go down to the 7 series and clicking on the items there. Now, that might be a little hard for you to do, right? Because you have to sit here and click on each one of all of the 7s. So I want to show you a quick, like we can do that, and that kind of gives you an idea. But these are revenue entries that we're looking for. So what I was going to do instead is let's go back to the All button. I'm going to go to my journal detail, and I'm going to take that account number. I'm going to add a field in there, and I'm going to make this the left function, which will cut the left of that item by the first digit, and then copy this down. I just double click on this little black box to the right bottom, and it normally will do that, and there we go, and it copies it all the way down, and then we'll call this the first num of account. Now let's go back to here and refresh the pivot table. Because I've added that column in the midst of the pivot table, it shows up. And now I can kind of take out the GL account, and I can bring down first num of account. So that allows me to do that. Now I can select the 7 as opposed to selecting all those others. And if you wanted to, you might not want to do this by journal entry number. You might actually want to do it by account number. So, I mean, you could do it by journal entry and account, like we've done here. And, as sort of a last but not least, as we bring all these things in here, I can bring the debit amount into the filter. So this is the only difference here is I'm just putting into the report filter here. And in this case, I am going to select, multiple items and get rid of the equal to 0. So these are all debit amounts that are in revenue accounts, which is 7 debit amounts, and these are all the accounts in the journal entry. So you could look at it this way. Another way is to kind of take the journal entry out like that, and you can even try it below, see how that looks. It doesn't really look that good still to me. So I prefer, probably look at it on an account by account basis. And, because there's not that many here, and one way to look at that is to kind of scroll out, and that's usually the control button and usually the mouse wheel, but you could also do it down here by scrolling out and scrolling in. So you can kind of see how many you have to work with. If that's too many for you, and you do want to sort it, again, just select the account, the most left column in your data is usually the best way to do it. Hit the sort button, descending, on the sum of debit, and now I have the largest debits to smallest debits showing up in my revenue accounts. So that, again, if 9 was suspense, then I could go down, or 8 is suspense, I could hit that, and then it will bring up all of the debits to the suspense accounts, as an example. So just wanted to go through those. We've talked about the round dollar journal entries, we talked about the net to 0, and we've talked about the debits to revenue. So, it gives you, I mean, just amazingly, with a pivot table and a few report filters, you're able to do quite a bit in your analysis. So let's kind of go back to our slides here. And what I wanted to now do is talk about graphing techniques and how we can kind of take, this isn't so much in the pivot tables that we're talking about it, but this is a technique of utilizing a scatter graph. And a scatter graph is really my favorite graph of all of them that are out there. So I mean, I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on this one. But The scatter graph, especially the way I show it with the normal scatter value to volume, and then also the difference scatter can really be an effective audit technique as well. So bear with us 1 second. We'll get that going for you. Now, taking a look at the scatter graph concept, you can start to see some of the limitations of other graphs. I'm quickly here just going to set up a line chart of this information. So we have 2 lines. I'm going to actually move that chart by right-clicking, selecting Move Chart, and put it to a new chart. We'll just call this 2-axis vol. And that doesn't look too bad. Again, we have all the supplier numbers down below. We have the actual values for each particular year. We could edit this a little bit, but I'll hold off for right now. I'll go back into my graph data just for a second. Notice that there's the counts during those times, so the volume and the values for each supplier. So if I wanted to add an additional data series, I can add that data series, go over to the graph data, and highlight, first off, the count data, and just maybe call this volume year 1. And again, just adding one more data series quickly to this, just to show you how to add data series, but also the limitations of this type of chart. And we will also, we'll call this volume, say, year 2. And now that we have that, we can actually go into these and edit these and just say, you know, values year 1. And just edit this one here, values year 2. Now, the problem with this chart is that the volume will never be seen on the chart again because of scale. So somehow I'm going to have to go down here and right-click and format data series and change that secondary axis. And if I could find the green one, I would do the same. But you can very quickly see how having 2 years worth of data, values, and then volumes, it's almost too difficult to even get the green, you know, fixed here. But let's try to fix the green here and say, yeah, put that on the secondary axis. So now I have, we'll just shoot back here. I have 2 different values and volumes that I can take a look at now. And however, this is very complicated to look at. A different way of looking at this would be to go to your scatter value volume. And this is actually the same amount of information that we're showing. However, much better way of looking at it. So let's just go back to this one here, bit of a mess. That one there, a lot easier to see where the deviations and outliers are held. Now, to get to this type of chart, scatter graph, I just want to note this is our volume and our values are underneath. If we ever wanted to change or add that type of information, always a really good idea to do is you would want to select the chart, go to Chart Tools, you can go to your Layout, and then in the Axis Titles, you can easily just add a horizontal title. Let's just put this one in here, and we'll call this Values, and press Enter. If you'd like to change the font, you can go to the Home and just change that font to, say, 20, so you can see it. And then going back to Chart Tools, Layout, Axis Titles, we're going to do the primary vertical axis. We'll do a rotated title, and in this case, we're going to put in Volume, again, Home, and gotta hit Enter, and then we'll change that to 20 as well so you can see it. So you see your values and your volumes now very easily. And in addition to that, you can highlight within year 1 and year 2 some of these real outliers in the data. And just showing how you can scroll into data, I just use the scroll button on my mouse, but another way to do so is to actually use this open box here and just select the actual zoom you want. But on a graph like a scatter graph where you're showing all of the data points, sometimes it's a good idea to take a look with a, more of a magnification than less. Now, one thing that you can do to a chart, especially a scatter graph, is by going up to your chart tools, you can take a look at a variety of options that you have here, but in your layout, you do have a trend line. And while I am not a pro at some of these trend lines, and I ask you to go take a look at the help menu of Excel, I think just putting a nice linear trend line in there, and I don't think you could do both. I think you can only do one. We can probably add another linear trend line based on year 2 and have both trend lines in there. But it is interesting to kind of see that average and see again what's falling below, what's falling above those average trend lines. So let's take a look at the data. Now, initially we had graph data that looked like this, and this may be the type of data that you get where you have the amounts lined up and accounts lined up. For scatter graphing, it's not the best way to go. So we're going to take a look at the scatter data, and in this particular case, just take a look at these columns over on this left-hand side. What we've done is we've put them in more of an order of amount and count for each year 1 and year 2. And this makes it a lot easier for us to highlight and just go to the bottom there and inserting a chart to add that scatter graph. Now, once that scatter graph is added, I can easily right-click, select data, add a data series, and in this particular case, we can, well, we have many options here. I mean, the first thing is to take the X values, which would be this column E, down to the bottom, and then the Y values, which are just set right within the same data series, would be the next series. And as you can see, we're just doing this quickly here just to show you, but obviously this chart looks a lot like the one that we have on its own, yet it was created using this approach. And what you'll want to do again, just to make it easier on yourself, is to highlight these data points and then just use the auto wizard of Excel to automatically calculate that this is the X and that is the Y. So going over to our scatter value volume again, by taking a look at the data points now that they have been scattered, we can actually just roll our mouse over points that we want to take a look at, which will allow us to see the value and volume for each one, the X and the Y, in that series. And this is how we would then go back to that scatter data to look up a particular supplier number that should be reviewed more fully. While a little beyond the basic scatter graph, really this graph is a basic scatter graph. However, it's looking at the differences between 2 time frames. So we have the same vendor data in here that was put in from a value and volume perspective, but now we're looking at the differences between 2 years in that data. So as we go into Excel, what we've done is we've copied the amount 1 and amount 2 columns in this way, but what we need to do over on the right is create a difference column. If I double click on that, you can see that I'm minusing the year 1, which I'm considering to be the year most current, less last year, year 2, which is E4. And then that was copied down the entire length of the data. So that gives me an amount difference. My count difference is, again, year 1 minus year 2, as you can see here in that count difference. And once I have both of those set, I can create a scatter graph by highlighting that data, saying Insert, Scatter, and then selecting that scatter graph. And when I do, I create this scatter difference chart. I'm only scatter graphing, in this case, 2 data points, invoice amount and count difference. And they're both a difference. So in looking at this chart, what you can start to see very quickly is while there are 5,726 vendors, you can very quickly see the outliers that pop out of that scatter graph. When we look at a scatter graph from a difference point of view, you have 4 different quadrants that you could be in, But I like to look at it from 4 different perspectives. We have ones that are listed as high dollar change with low count. And that is a very strange outlier that would happen. It's like a one-time adjustment. Number 2s are actually, they make a lot of sense because they are at the high and low end, yet they are relative. So as things go up in volume, so do value. Things go down in volume, so do value. And that makes sense. Number 3 doesn't make a lot of sense because we're saying as time or volume goes up, the actual value goes down, or as the volume goes down, the value goes up. Last but not least, you could maybe see some inefficiency or just some interesting behavior where in the 4 set, you actually are looking for lots of activity that might be inefficient. It could be a way that they're processing data that's leading to inefficiencies. So heading back into Excel, we can start to highlight some of these points so that we can go back into the scatter data and into this scatter graph here and look for those differences. So here is one, $58 million. Shouldn't be that hard to find. However, over on the left-hand side, what's interesting here is that we can actually see that we have more activity, 1,466 more invoices, yet we have $24 million less of activity. Just an odd statement to make. There doesn't seem to be a huge inefficiency problem, or we would see more items here that have very little value but lots of activity. Don't seem to have a whole lot of that going on. And I think, again, just some relative large-sized items that are trending. I mean, you have 1,500 more invoices and you have $15 million more. It kind of makes sense. Let's take a look at that vendor, but it does have some relative sense to what is happening there. Again, the scatter data, we're looking at differences, which then show up here, and we can look at it into that 4-quadrant type analysis. Okay, so we've launched the next poll, which is what function is used to determine if a cell is a round number? Is it offset, mod, mid, or round? And I haven't seen any questions come in the last few minutes here, so we're pretty good on questions. I really like the scatter graph, be it for general ledger, for vendor. Taking a look at differences between accounts and time frames is a great way of looking at things, regardless what account it is. So anyway, see most of you have voted. I'll keep this open for another half minute to a minute, and then we will continue on. We're a little ahead of schedule, which is good to see. And okay. See, most of you have voted, 94%. Keep that going for a little bit more. Okay, and I'm going to close that poll in just a few seconds here. If there are any questions, feel free to send them in as we go. And you are correct that the more people have noted it, the mod function is the function used to identify round items. And we will, round function would have been good. I think the actual round function, I think adds kind of like, do you want to round it to 2 decimals or 3 decimals, whatever. I think that's how that works, but I'm not 100% sure. Okay. So the next thing, I just wanted to note that sampling is a technique used by a lot of auditors, and there are probably a few ways to do it. I know we talked a little bit before about a product called Top Cats, which is something that could be utilized. I talk about in this white paper that we have the how to use Excel. Somewhere in here, I'm sure I have sampling, and if not, actually it looks like I don't. I thought I had it in here. But It is a lot harder to do in raw Excel. We'll kind of show you some ideas, but it is sort of hard to do. And hence why I mentioned Topcats, and I'll mention this active data for Excel product. Even if you just use it for like a 30-day license, which they give you the 30-day for free, I think it's well worth it because you probably could use it on a few audits and get a lot of your sampling done the statistical way. When you take a look at the AICPA manuals on this topic, it follows a pretty similar process as we get our reporting done. Set up the audit procedure objective, figure out what is a failure, what isn't a failure of that test, get a population, pick a method, pick a sample, and then audit and evaluate that sample. So the different types of sampling, mind you, I don't want to make this a sampling course because we'll be here for a while, but the types of sampling generally are attribute sampling. Is a control in place? Are people signing off on documents? Then there's monetary unit sampling, which is usually to test the existence of an item that you're going to confirm, and or it's more just to kind of test the value. And in the monetary unit sense, what you end up doing is using the dollar that is in the actual dollars as your monetary unit. So $1 million has a million more of a chance than a $1 from being selected. And then there's Stratified, which a lot of other people use. I think there's a fourth one on here, which is called Judgmental, which is people just flip through a book and pick which ones. But I think there are some better techniques. These are the different types of inputs that you would put into a sampling product. And I tried to summarize them here because they get real confusing. And I'm not a mathematician, so definitely something that you need to be careful of. But also just be able to understand these concepts. And for the most part, in setting a record sample, you set a confidence. You have an upper error limit, which is the total maximum error that you can expect, or the total tolerable error that you can withstand. The expected total errors is the percentage of error that you expect. And then an interval, if you put that in there, is to have like an interval, and then within that interval, a sample will be selected, and that'll end up usually telling you like the number of errors that you can get and not blow your sample. So, we'll show you this in a little more detail in a second. From a monetary unit standpoint, though, as I said, the dollars in the field are the actual sampling unit. Everything else stays about the same, except the upper error limit is what we call materiality in the audit sense. Versus being like a percentage off in the process. It's more of a dollar amount now. And so, with that all noted and some of the theory, if you will, behind us, what we can do is I'll just go into this journal detail table for right now, and just imagine these are journal entries with count numbers. In this case, we're just using this for a simple kind of sampling. I mean, one thing that you can do is develop a RAND number, and let me just make sure I'm not lying to you here, but the RAND function will calculate a random number, and you can basically, so this would be a RAND number. You could go down the list here and have multiple RAND numbers that are calculated. And one way of doing this is to kind of stratify the RAND numbers, like which showed up in, maybe what I'll do here is just kind of add some, so you can see the different, it's kind of a pretty, I guess, has many decimal places type of a number. What you're able to do is then maybe sort on this number, or you could stratify on this number to kind of select a random sample. Now, I think each time you almost want to calculate it, as we've done here, by putting all these RAND statements next to each item. But I would suggest then copying it and then pasting it as a value. So now it is set in the data. And just now that we have that, some of the things we can do is just apply a filter and say sort largest to smallest. And now you have that. You could do smallest to largest, but that is how you could kind of create your own random sample and have Excel kind of randomly throw numbers down that you utilize. So that's one option. Another option using the add-ins that I think are quite useful is this is active data. There's a lot of features of active data. In our case, let's use one of them now just for fun. And then what I'll do is I'll talk about sampling. I kind of want to summarize this data because it is basically at an account level, and let's say I wanted to select journal entry, actual journal entries. So I could summarize or group by the journal entry number and add up the debits and credits. I don't need to include statistics for this one. I just need to kind of get my list of journal entries. So that gives me the list of journal entries. And, that was useful, but it wasn't necessary for what we're about to do. So now in the sampling piece, there are a few items that we could talk through here. We have the random sample, which in this case, oops, sorry, let me click out of that. It's telling me I have 10,001 sample items, so that must be, well, I don't know, 2,000. So I think we want to calculate what that is because there's 2,761 items. So number of sample items, though, let me just... So in setting the sample size for what we're looking at here, I could set this to, say, 90%, which is the expected error rate, and then the tolerable error rate is 10% in this case. The expected error rate, I'm going to put in actually at 0.01. The tolerable error rate is 0.1. So I believe the risk of incorrect acceptance is 10% as well. So let's calculate what that is. So I have a sample size of way too much, and I think I need to change this to 90, so that's bringing it down a little bit. So what we're doing here is with an expected error rate, so I believe if I put in an expected error rate of 0 and I calculate, I do get a smaller sample size based on the population. So what this will do is this will calculate in a statistical way if you need to do that using kind of percentage parameters. That's one way of doing it. The monetary unit sampling sample here, what we would do is, let's say we wanted to sample on the debits themselves. It'll actually calculate the population value. The tolerable misstatement for this audit, let's say, is $1 million. And the expected misstatement is, let's say, I'm going to put in $30,000. The risk of incorrect acceptance, I'll put at 10%. So that was the kind of the risk that there is a failure, as opposed to, you're 90% confident kind of thing, is maybe another way of saying it. These are other factors that are in there, but we can then calculate, and it still gives me a pretty large sample size based on this. So I obviously would need to, understand that when I'm dealing with $1 billion, that probably materiality needs to be a little bit bigger, as well as the expected misstatement. That brings it down quite a bit. If I go to 20% now, that brings it to a sample size of 200. Okay, this is all statistical, so it's not judgmental and another way of doing it. So let me hit the finish button. And now that I have kind of my sampling interval, which is in dollars, mind you, what active data will do is kind of count through this file in a dollars format, $6 million at a time. So it'll pick items along that way, but it's using the dollars in this case to count what it's going to pick. It starts in a random spot. In this case, is 44,801. You can change that if you'd like to. Yep. Okay. So with all that said, I'll hit the finish button. And what that then did was it not only picked my sample, which has 200 items in it, but it tells me all this other monetary unit stuff that was interesting, like where did it hit, what was the hit point, what was the original row, et cetera, in that data. So that being a way of using monetary unit sample. The one that I find people use the most, so let me go back to this one here and hit the Stratify button. And I'm going to stratify on the debit amounts as opposed to stratify on the journal entry numbers. And I'll say, journal entries between 0 and 1,000, sure, and 1,000, and let's say 10,000, and 10,000 to 100,000, 100,000 to a million, and a million to 100 million, and I'll hit the Stratify button. So just very quickly, I know we talked about stratification before. This is a way of doing the stratification even easier, in essence, and kind of showing you the 2,700 journal entries laid out in a, how many are under 1,000, how many are under 10,000, etc. It's pretty good stratification. However, these 141 items up here do make up about 81% of the dollars. So, from a stratification point of view, now let's show sample column by clicking that button here and going up above in the sample size section here now. You might want to say, well, this only makes up 0.1%. I'll put 0. This one is 0. This one I'll take one item from because it's 3%. This one I'll take 3 items, 15%. This one I'll take 10 items because it's a much higher number. And this one I definitely want to take that one that was $114 million. Now that I've set my sample size, let me round it out here and make that 11. So I think we'll end up with, actually no, I apologize. I was right first time there. So that'll get us to 15. What I can do is not only hit the Stratify button, and it got rid of my samples. Hold on one second. I should have hit the Finished button. Doesn't take too long to set up. And by hitting the Finish button, not only will the stratified summary be completed, but a sample will also be extracted. So great use of the tool. I don't want to spend too much more time on it, but at the same time, from a sampling point of view, you can do quite a bit with this add-in. And Topcats, which is another one, is quite good, and there probably are some other ones as well, so that are out there. Okay, so I wanted to conclude, as we're kind of finishing up in the let's say 100 to 110 minutes that we have here today, talking about macros and a couple of macro toolkits that we'll be providing you at the end of the presentation. I'm not a macro expert by any stretch, but I think you can do a lot of formatting of data, adding totals to columns, adding tick marks. There's a lot of stuff that anything repetitive that you do as an auditor, you can macro. So I am going to do my best at showing you a few examples of that in the next few minutes here. And more importantly, though, and I'm just going to jump to it right now, is we're also going to talk about some of the added bonuses. And you notice the 2 items in there, the directory list creator and the import data files one. These are Excel macro enabled worksheets, and you just have to trust the macro when you open it up if you so choose. But in doing that, you'll be able to run this macro, and we'll talk about that as well in the next few minutes here. So, okay, let me jump into Excel now that we know what we're talking about. Final topic of the day here. And just need to get to my Excel. There we go. So, I can do it at this journal. We'll use the summary journal page as an example. It's good as any other one. So one of the things that we are doing all the time, let me just make sure I have a few worksheets open. Let me just open up another worksheet or two. Bear with me one second. Okay, so we'll open up that one, and while I'm here, why don't I open up this macro one as well? Sure. Okay, so now that I have a few of these worksheets open, this is something we're probably always doing, is going to view, arrange all, hit the tiled button. Okay, so let's now show you how you could do this from a macro point of view. Now, if you click on your view button, you do have this macros over here, but a little bit kind of a better way of possibly doing this is, one second here, can select the more commands, and in the customize ribbon, so what by the way, I selected this button up here, which is the customizing our toolbar button, and we're basically customizing the ribbon, as you can see here. And there's this one item that they don't select for you, which is developer, and we're going to select that. So I click the OK button, and that then brings my developer tab in. Now that allows all the macro stuff to be available to you, and things like the Visual Basic page, if you do need to look at that, is something you can look at. But let's click on just record macro, and I'm going to call this range all windows. You have to put them all together like that. There are ways of putting some spaces in between, but let's just make this Control A. And I'm going to do it in my personal macro workbook, which saves it on my hard drive for all of my Excel files. So it's a much better way. And we're just going to go in a description here, arrange to a tiled windows. Okay, we hit the OK button. Okay, so now that I've done that, I can just very carefully select View, Arrange All, Tiled, OK. Just like that. And then there's a stop button down at the bottom here. Okay, we hit the stop button. Now it's saved. I can go back to my developer toolkit, or just let me just kind of open these all up again. And now it's hard to open them up. Hey, look at that. All right, so we open them all up. But if I wanted, I can go back to View, Arrange All. But another thing I can do is just hit Control A, and Control A will bring everything back to normal. As more of a tiled type of a format. Okay, so that's one thing to teach you. Now, the second thing to teach you, now that I have this open, let me go back to my summary of the journal detail, which is here. So another thing we're doing all the time is we're setting up tick marks. So let's do this. Let's go back to our developer tab. We're going to go record macro, and we're going to call this set tick mark. Okay, and we'll do this Control T for tick mark. We'll do it into the personal macro workbook, and we'll call create a wingdings, so that you'll remember that name, and that's basically the font format, letter A. So we'll now hit that. So now that I guess I was recording now. What I'll do is go to my Home tab, and in the Calibri section, which is what it's set to, I'm going to go down to the Web Dings, and I'm going to type an A, and I'm also going to change the font of that A to a green, and of course I'll highlight that, sorry, turn it to a green, and I will hit the Enter button like that. And then my developer section, I'll then hit the stop recording button. Now, what's kind of annoying is if I then do Control T, a lot of times it doesn't kind of finish exactly the way, and notice how it brings me back, mind you, to the E3 spot. So if I do Control T, here, way down here, Control T, it brings me back to this E3. So that's quite annoying. Now, I don't want to scare you, but if I click on Visual Basic at this point, you can take a look at your macros and try to decipher what's going on, but I'll close that because that's scary for right now. What we'll do is we're going to create another macro because that didn't work. But this time you click the Use Relative References when you record, and that changes everything. So now that I record it, I'm going to go set tick mark. version 2. And this time around, I'm going to go to my home button. I am going to set it to green. I'm going to set it to yellow because I forgot to do that first. And then I'm going to hit the web dings again, hit the A button, and hit enter. And now I will stop that macro. Whoops, sorry. Stop macro. Okay. Now, if I'm over here and I do a Control T, oh, and I forgot to save it. Wait, let me do that one more time. All these things you forget to do. So what I didn't do is I didn't save it to an actual item. But let me try to work my way out of this, even though I didn't save it to an actual item there. What you can do is you could add more commands to your ribbon up there. And that's what's, I think, kind of useful. And we could add macros, and we could go down to your personal macro sheet and add the tick mark version 2. And then I can click on that tick mark version 2 on the right-hand side now and modify it and make it a tick mark if I could find one. And somewhere in here we'll find it. If not, if you can't find it, I'm sure you can if we looked hard enough. There it is. Okay. And now I hit the OK button. Notice now that tick mark is placed right here. So I can just hit that tick mark, and the right one is putting it in a relative reference point of view. It's not bringing me back to, E4. It's now putting a tick mark wherever I'd like, and that's available. Now, if you don't like where that is, you can say show below the ribbon, and then it's right here. So it's a little more convenient to be hitting that as well. So again, wanted to show you just some simple macros. Now I'm going to show you some really complex macros, but these were built for me, so it's a little bit different here. And let me actually close kind of everything. And what I'm going to do is open up the first item, which is the directory list creator. So that's one of the macros you're going to get. In about 3 or 4 days, we'll send out the CPE forms, and we'll have a link to this and etc. But we're going to enable the content for this information. And if you scroll out a little bit, you can kind of see we have like file path, file name, file type, etc. listed as some of the things in here. And what we are therefore doing at this point is being able to kind of create like a directory of our hard drive. So if you go to the add-ins button up here, so that's one option. Now going back to developer, you could click on Visual Basic. The other thing that you can do is select the Alt F11, which is down below. Do you see that Alt F11 showing up on the screen? You can hit Visual Basic. And just to note, I mean, it is pretty complex what's happening from a modules point of view in here. It's the mod main and the mod toolbar, and I believe it's more in the toolbar section. So there's a fair amount of code in there. But forgetting that for a second, if I go to the add-ins and say create director listing, what it's going to do is ask me for a folder on my hard drive to select. So I'm going to select the D drive, and I'm going to drill into my AuditNet data, and I'm just going to do it of all the December 16th, which is today's webinar, all the files associated. So I'll hit the OK button. And what it did was, if you remember the old directory command in DOS, is it created an actual directory of all of my files, the path, the file name, the file type, the size of the file, the date it was created, the time, the date it was last modified, and I think I thought it had the author, but it doesn't, so it just kind of tells you times and dates. I find this is really useful if you're doing fraud investigations and get a hard drive. If you also want to look for the largest items that are in a folder or the smallest items in the folder, if you're looking for certain days that are kind of odd to you, you could take a look at these days as well and see when things were created in the hard drive. You could pivot table this data as we've shown you as well. But wanted to show you that's what that macro toolbar does, and it's kind of complex but yet interesting little toolkit. Now the next one out there is Combine tool, and so imagine this happens a lot. I'm sure you end up getting a data file of journal entries, and you get file number 1, and then you get file. Oops. file number 2. Just try to open that up. For some reason, my computer's taking a little longer opening it up. I must have closed Excel and opened it up, and it confused it. What I'm trying to do here is just to note that you sometimes need to combine these files together. And sorry, this is taking so long. Oh, there we go. Shouldn't have closed Excel. All right, very good. Almost there. Just going to give Excel another second or two here, and I may have to drop back and punt, but there we go. So this is GL workbook number 2, and then there's a number 3, and assumedly you've gotten these 3, and they all will have the same data in them. I can open up this import data files macro, which will also be giving you an enable the content, and then you just go to your add-ins section. And there's a new item there. It doesn't say create directory listing like it used to. Now it's import files. And you go import files. And again, it's for some reason just taking a little longer right now. I don't know why. Sorry about this. But it'll send me to the hard drive and ask me what folder are my data files in. So I just need to kind of navigate back to that AuditNet folder. And it was the combined tool folder, and I opened that up, and there were 3 tables in there. And what the Excel macro did, just get rid of that now, is it not only tells me it kind of picked up 3 tables. One was called Book 1, Book 2, Book 3. These were the sheets. These were the rows of data that it pulled in. It even gives me a summary header to kind of say, the header of this one looked like that, the header of that one looked like that, and that one had that, but it had this little extra fiscal year field at the end of it. And then all of that was summarized into this data file here, so now we have like 300 rows of data in here as opposed to the 100 in each of those original sections. So again, wanted to show you some of the free things will be thrown out there, but also to kind of show you some macros at the same time. And it's obvious my Excel is now acting up for some reason. So what we'll do is we'll jump into the next and last polling question of the day. So what keys can you select to quickly open the Visual Basic Editor? Is it Control X, Control Z, Control F9, or Alt F11? So which of the 4 do you select when wanting to quickly open the Visual Basic Editor? And again, great time for questions. We're kind of at the end of the broadcast for today. I mean, not fully over, but opening up to final questions and such. But if you have any questions, feel free to kind of post them into that window, and we will answer them in the next minute or so. Just taking a look here, leaving this one open just for a few more seconds for any final people. And any questions that come in, I'm not seeing any come through recently, so if you do have any, though, feel free to post them. We'll keep this open just for another few seconds. Okay. Well, let me close that poll and share that with everyone. And Alt F11 is correct, and many of you may have used that before. So we will hide that and really just kind of bring you towards the end of the presentation here, just noting a few things. We will have a variety of files that we used in class. I have an actual, let me just bear with me as I find this for you. We have an index to the files, and we more or less just send this folder that you're looking at on my screen with the file index in there, which is in Word. So you can take a look at that. And that had all of the items there except for the active data link, which you can get from your slides here. And again, here's the file index. So that PDF document of Excel as an audit software, the data requests, the macros, the various files that I used, you're welcome to them. And feel free as well, just a note as we continue on here, that we will be posting a recording of this. We might post it on Audit Software Videos. It might be on AuditNet. We'll let you know in the link so you'll know where to go, so that you can get access to a recording of today, and therefore you have the files and you have the recording. We also have Audit Software Videos. And in January, you'll have an ability to kind of sign up for free. So, feel free to email me if you want to be let known of that. But we'll be letting everybody know in January, and then you can register for the website, and it's free. And we have like 70 hours of videos out there on Excel and Access and ACL and other products like Active Data for Excel as well. So just a note of other things that are coming your way. Feel free to ask any questions. Yep, and yep, I see some questions in here about PDF files and conversions. There are some products, even Active Data for Excel has some PDF in there. But I know that I forget the actual product as well, so I agree with Jim in the answer here just to Google it. And I wouldn't expect Adobe PDF Converter to work. I know ACL and IDEA have really good tools for that and have used them. I think IDEA's tool is even better than ACL's, to be honest, because I've had some trouble with the ACL version. I also think from a questions point of view, another item came in about the data analysis add-in to Excel, and these are the various add-ins that you get. Let me just show you here. If you click on your add-ins button here, I thought there was a way to kind of add more to them. So I think we customized the ribbon, and you can kind of go, somehow we can find your add-ins. Here they are. Oops, can't do it from here though. And then for all the add-ins you have, there usually is one in here. I think it's called Analysis Tool Pack. That's the one that I've seen, and you can kind of go, and supposedly I have these kind of in here, so they may be in my View button. I hit the OK button. Maybe I'll hit View, and I'm having trouble finding it now that I've selected it. So do apologize about that, but generally speaking, you can see that showing up, and normally the way to fix it, as we talked before, is to customize that, and in the More Commands button, there is a way of kind of selecting those additional add-ins that you can put in there. But all right, back to the questions here. So hopefully that helps, and just trying to think, I don't know if I don't have any other additional questions. Just kind of looking in the future here. We're going to be doing a fair amount of this training in 2014 as well, so do expect something from us, and we'll be getting that schedule out in early January for the other training that will be coming your way. But as kind of a final note, thanks again for coming today. Myself and Jim do appreciate any sort of questions, especially technical ones. If you want to send them my way, feel free. And within the next few days, you'll get your CPE form for those that filled out the polling questions, or emailed me. The answers is fine. And then also a link to all these wonderful files.
Rich, just a reminder to those who joined today in a group viewing, we will require the appropriate forms listing all of the individuals who attended the viewing from a single location, and those need to be signed and certified, and then we will get the CPE certificates out, but it should be sent in an Excel spreadsheet, and those can be sent either to myself or to Rich directly. And I just wanted to remind everybody that there will be evaluation questions that you will receive when we close the webinar, so please take a moment to answer those questions. Those are not the polling questions. The polling questions are entirely separate. These are evaluation and basically provide an opportunity to give us feedback on what you felt went well with the webinar and maybe some areas that we need to improve on. But we do appreciate the feedback from all of you. And again, to echo Rich's comments, we really appreciate your joining us today and participating in this webinar. And we will be offering more webinars in 2014, and we will be using a similar pricing schedule. So please share the information with those in your network and in your office, and we look forward to welcoming you back. And thanks again, Rich, for putting on a great webinar.
Great, thanks again. Thanks again, Chip.
Okay.